assumptions, we do that every day, right? You assume you would come here. You assume it's going to be worth your time. We make assumptions all day long. And we have beliefs, right? And these are our ideas about things. The problem with assumptions is that when we hold these untested assumptions as truth, we're not willing to, and we're not challenging them. There's no way we can grow. There's no way we can evolve. And when we think about it, we tend to base our life a lot of times on assumptions, but think about our clients who come to us and we are making assumptions that we understand things they're telling us when we really may not. We may be assuming because it's similar to something in ourselves, but that doesn't mean it's true. And when you think about it, really, beliefs are assumptions that we have internalized. So think about that for a moment, because it's really important to understand that if you believe something, right, it's not necessarily a fact. It's something you believe. So it's an assumption that you've now internalized. So let's look at, since we're talking about creating awareness, exactly what is a shift. So if you just go by the dictionary, right, it's just a change in position, a change in place. That's a shift. Something has moved. But in coaching, it is actually a change in perspective about a firmly held idea. And the important part is that may or may not be true for the client. Right? So it's not necessarily their truth. And that's where we come in to be better listeners. So what we're really trying to do is give our clients a new viewpoint based on the same circumstances. Those circumstances don't change. But we're trying to give them a new viewpoint, a new way of seeing things. And often, there's this misconception. And the misconception is that it has to come in a huge aha moment, right? But I can tell you that very often, the shift or changes come in waves. That's how a client described it to me. I thought it was a perfect word. It can come in waves, which means it can come throughout the conversation. It's not just necessarily one big thing. So I'm going to give you an example. I had, and it comes very often when we're reflecting something. So there was a client who was talking about her situation of trying to decide something. I says, you know, it sounds a little bit like there's this push and pull going on. And she just stopped. I didn't even get to my question. She's, oh my God, that's exactly what it feels like. And that already began some awareness. And another client was telling me how she had grown up and they told her never to go to college and she wasn't smart enough and all those kinds of things. And by the way, whenever I'm talking about a client or ever giving you an example, it's either from my upcoming book or it's with absolute permission from the client, or I've changed the circumstances slightly. But everything is, you know, legit. So I had this client, and she felt that, you know, she just wasn't all that smart, even though she wound up graduating with a double major. But what I said to her, you know, I said, it's so interesting listening to that because I've always thought of you as so brilliant. And then I was just, you know, like to me, it was just an offhand comment, literally. And I have to tell you, to this day, and this was probably close to 20 years ago, she still reminds me of how that altered her entire life. And it was just a comment that I made. So the point I'm trying to make here is that these shifts come a lot of times during the conversation, and we may not be even realizing that it could be happening. Okay, so I am, I want to say opposed to, let's say, jargon. And to me, jargon is when you have to explain something to the client as to what you mean. And to me, every coaching conversation, if it's really masterful, it just uses our everyday language. It just uses words that we would say. I always say, would you say that to your friend over lunch, right? To me, it just should be natural conversation. So if you think about it, the word belief and limiting ideas, we think about that, that's coaching talk. We know what it means, and for this talk, it's fine to call them beliefs. But when you think about it with a client, I find actually I avoid that word. And so what I like to think of it, it's the idea or the thought the client thinks is true that is keeping them stuck. It's the idea or the thought that they think is true. And so I even use those words with the client, idea or thought. So it sounds like you have this idea that. Sounds like you have this thought that. Rather than you have a belief. To me, it winds up almost actually sounding derogatory in some ways. Like you have this belief, and I'm going to prove to you that it's not really the truth. So there's something, that's off for me in that. That's just my thing. Okay. So now what I want to show you is the objective that we are striving for when we are coaching. So let's think of this as our world. It's everything we know, everything we believe, everything we think, every experience we've had. And then there's the rest of the world, and that is everything that we don't already know, all the things that are out there that we're not aware of. And the goal in coaching is to open up people's worlds so that they're now exposed to things they didn't already know. And so when we are working with clients and we want them to shift their thinking, what we really want them to do, I always say, and I'm going to show you the slide, but I'm not going to leave it on because it can make you nuts, because it moves. And the last thing, anyway. So what I always say is we want clients to have like a spin of their head so that they can't even remember how they were thinking before they started. That's really the goal. So I came up with this. Like, whoa! All right. But what happens instead of that total shift, don't stare at it because it can make you nuts. But what happens instead of that total shift sometimes is what I'm going to call strategy. So how many people in this room, you hear somebody has a strategy and you think, that is so cool, that's great, strategies are wonderful? I mean, be honest. Okay. And how many people think, well, maybe strategies aren't so good? Anybody? Who hasn't taken my class? Okay. So what's really important about strategies is the intention behind them. Because we have strategies that are really temporary ways of coping. So let's look at that first picture. And the person says, I am never going to eat chocolate cake again. What are the chances that that's going to hold for that person's entire life? Right? We all know, probably 0. Never going to touch the French fries, whatever it is, right? And what happens in coaching is that people say they're going to use their willpower. They may not use that word, but from now on I'm going to go. But that means that you have not helped that person see their situation differently. Another example, the sticky note, or I'm going to write it on my calendar. So how many times have you put a sticky note up to remind you of something on a daily basis? You hear a client say, I'm going to put that on my mirror, I'm going to put that on my desk. And what happens after a few weeks? You don't even see it anymore, right? It's just become part of the furniture. Okay, so, and the last one, the people pleaser. So these are just examples. There are tons of strategies. And I didn't want to spend a lot of time, but I wanted to give you the idea. So a people pleaser, you know, I had this person who, she was taking people to church on Sundays, and she bought a new van because she felt this will be so much help, you know, this will really help these people and be such a nice way to transport them. And then she came to me and she said, I am so angry and so upset, and I'm really disappointed because nobody appreciates that I bought this van to bring them to church. Well, what is that really all about? It was her strategy to get people to like her, to accept her, to include her, whatever her thing was. The point I'm trying to make is that so much of coaching goes into the strategy versus changing the thinking. So let me give you a couple of examples. So I had a woman, and she said she was having trouble feeling okay about how much she was charging her customers. And she said, but you know what, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to journal. I'm going to set up my schedule the night before. I'm going to really put things, you know, in a particular way so I will know and be more prepared. And I said, you know, that sounds great, and those are great strategies, but that does not even remotely address what you're charging people and how you're feeling about that. So, and then we, you know, and then it just said, what do you think? And she said, you know, you're right, because of course it doesn't. Another example, just to give you an idea of how deep coaching can go. I know some of you may have even been on this call. Again, I have permission. It was somebody who said, my whole house is like a museum. It's so pristine, it's perfect, everything in place, except for my basement. And what does everybody want to do with that? Okay, well, let's work on cleaning up your basement. Now, what do you need to do that, right? Where are the piles? Those are strategies. What we went for was, what is making the basement different from the rest of the house, right? So I said, my question was, what would it mean for you if your basement was totally cleaned up? And you're never going to believe, the response was, oh my gosh, it's actually my legacy, and my kids are going to be in that room with all my stuff, and it just means I'm closer to the end. And it was so deep. And so my point being, it would have been easy to help him clean up that basement, maybe for a few weeks, and then he would have stopped, because we know he never would have gotten the whole basement cleaned up. So my point being, it's not okay to stop at strategies. Okay, so there's a lot of faulty thinking that goes on in coaching, in our clients, in us. You know, we have these ideas, but there's something wrong with the idea, even though we may not realize it obviously. And what happens very often, as we know, there's a fear of failure or a fear of success that holds people back. And people say, well, what do you mean a fear of success? I just had a client recently, she said to me, oh my gosh, if this is successful, I'm going to have to hire more people, I'm not going to have enough time, I'm not that. And because there's so many ideas that go with things that may or may not be true. And I'm going to say that, you'll hear that a lot. So unless people are really motivated to do something different, they're probably not going to do it. So it's important to help the client see the value in finding a new interpretation of their perceived limitation. So I say, oh my God, so many big words. But let's think about just for a second what that means. It means that unless the client really has the impetus to really want to make that change, they're never going to do it. So they have this perceived limitation. I don't think I can do it, right? We'll get into plenty of examples. But unless they have some kind of new way of unless they realize there's a value in making the change, they're probably not going to make the change. So, go on. So there are two questions that I say to always hold in mind. One of these, many of you have heard before, but there are really two questions. And this goes for every conversation, so I don't mean just for coaching. The first question, why is he or she telling you this? So think about that for a moment. Why is this person telling you this? Because remember, clients give us all parts and pieces of their stories, right? All parts and pieces, and we're wondering, so what do you think it might do to think about, why is this person telling me this? How could that help you? Anybody think what that might do for you? As you're thinking, why is this person telling you this? It'll open your curiosity more. And the other question, which is really critical, what is making it a problem for this person? Now, let me give you a quick example. Let's suppose you and I have a date, and we're going to lunch at your absolute favorite restaurant. And about a half an hour before we go, I call you, and I say, oh, I'm so sorry, but I have to cancel. You know, I just don't feel right. So, how many people would be disappointed? Okay? How many people would be disappointed and maybe a little pissed? Like, you know, you shouldn't have waited till the last half hour to call me. You kind of knew you weren't doing that. So how many people would be a little pissed? I know I would be. Okay. How many people would say, all right, you know, things happen, and so, you know what, we'll just reschedule. How many people? Okay. So what are we noticing here? We're noticing that every person is going to have a different reaction, right? A different response to the same circumstances. So when we think about it, when the client comes with their problem, we have to try to understand what makes it a problem for this person. Because what's a problem for you, take the same circumstances, won't be a problem for you. Right? Does that make sense? That not everybody in this room is going to have the exact same response to the same circumstances. So it's the same thing with our clients. Okay? All right. Now, we come to one of my pet peeves. And something that people really give me a hard time about. And that is, and this is one thing I really want you to be open to trying. And that is, when you ask your questions, start with the word what. So, why questions we know takes people back and they're justifying. We all know that. When and where, there are probably appropriate times. But I get the argument, well, what about how? And I say, the most part, how goes to methodology. How goes to how are you going to do it? And then it's fine at the end of the conversation. How are you actually going to do that? But I'm going to tell you that the what question, try it out and you'll have an opportunity, but see what happens. And if you really think about the only time the what question, by the way, you have to be careful because if you're asking for information, like, you know, what session did you attend before this one, I'm not learning anything, right? So it's when you're asking a question about the person, which leads us to separating the story from the person. Everybody has their story, right? This happened, I want to change this, I'm not happy with my employee, I'm not happy at my job, whatever it is, right? Everybody has their story. But what's really important is that every question should be about the person. It should be understanding who is this person, how do they think, what are their ideas, what's important to them. It should always be about the person. So let me give you an example that actually happened. So the client said, I need to clean the clutter from my desk. And it was on a I think it was a class practice call. And the coach said, well, tell me more about the clutter. Who cares, right? Who cares if it's piles? Who cares what it's a mess? That's not important. So what really wound up being important was the question, what makes cleaning your desk important to you? And you wouldn't believe the answer. Now, this has happened, I mean, I'm thinking of two examples. With one, the woman said, well, you know, I'm working on my entire environment, and it got into a whole, you know, we really got to the crux with that one question. And in the other case, it was, you know, it's interesting. I think it's because my father wants me to be successful, and if I keep a messy desk, then it's kind of like an excuse, and, you know. So my point being that you want to get to that essence of the problem. So here's what we're going to do. Oh, I have, sorry, one more example. When a client who is an internal coach in a major corporation, we all know, and she had somebody come to her, and she was very upset because one of her team members had shown her a video, and she found the video very offensive. And she said, so I wanted to ask her, you know, what made it offensive? What kind of video was it? And I said, no. It has nothing to do with, it didn't matter what it was. The point was, it was an offensive video. Now let's find out what is she going to do, because it's a team member, and how is she going to handle that? That's what's important. Okay, so I'm going to give you some practice scenarios. So here's what I'm going to want to do. There are 3 scenarios. We'll see, you can just get a few minutes. I want you to just turn to a partner, and I'm going to read each one, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. So Linda is a mother, and she's been complaining about her child's late hours, the poor schoolwork, and the loud music. And then she says, well, my kid goes to college, basically next year. I'm not going to survive without her. Second scenario. Randy is complaining about his employees' very, very poor attendance. And it's been like that now for 6 months. And he says, but if I confront her, I'm afraid she's going to quit, and I'm going to be stuck without anybody. Or I'll have to find a replacement. And in the third one, Mary says, you know, I'm not sure about being on that committee, but I really think my husband wants me to do it. So here's what I want you to do. Turn to a partner. You can do this any way, whether you want to take turns sharing, brainstorm together, doesn't matter, whatever works for you guys. But what is the next thing you would do after hearing each one? Go ahead. Hold on to your thoughts. We're going to revisit this in a while. And we'll have the same scenarios again. We'll see what happens. Okay, so now what we're going to look at is actual mechanics of the shift. What really goes on? So, the client comes to us, and this is where they are at that moment in time when they come to us, right? They have their situation, they have their problem, they have their challenge, whatever's going on. And then they tell us, basically, notice the word, what somebody claims they want, right? And this is what they're hoping for, this is what they claim they want. So why do I say that? Because we cannot ever accept immediately at face value what they're telling us. Because it may not align with their values, it may not be their truth. So here's a classic example that I couldn't make this up, and it's outrageous. So I had this guy who wanted to be an entrepreneur. he had this great idea for a business and he wanted to be an entrepreneur. And then it wasn't happening, right? Week after week, this was a zillion years ago when I was first coaching, and it wasn't happening. And so I said to him, I'm really curious. What are your thoughts about entrepreneurs? And he said, they're greedy. They don't spend time with their family. They can make poor decisions. And it went on. I mean, I actually grabbed my pen, because I usually don't write down very much, and I just, And then I said to him, well, this is very interesting. So if they're greedy and they don't make good decisions and blah, 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 then what has you wanting to be an entrepreneur? Well, it's that kind of a thing that wakes people up to saying, oh my gosh, you know what? And I have to tell you, it's now, I'm going to say easily 15 years later, and it never happened. So my point being, you have to be careful when somebody tells you what they want. You've really got to make sure it's for real. So what happens is people start to take steps towards what they want, right? And then what happens? They start going and reverting, right? Don't we all have that experience? They're starting to move, they're getting there, and then there's a slide, right? A slide almost back. Why? Because where they start, let's face it, for all of us, it's comfortable, no matter how miserable it is. It's comfortable because we're familiar with it, right? Okay. And what happens is, we have what I call the leverage point. And the leverage point is that place in the conversation where it feels balanced, like the scales. It feels balanced between where I am and what I want, but the what I want can be fraught with faulty thinking, right? And or the fear. So, we need to help a client actually acknowledge their pain, so to speak, their current situation. And that way, if they realize just how bad things really are, then they will be motivated and encouraged to move forward. But I will tell you, if the pain isn't bad, they're not going anywhere, right? Because it's comfortable, it's familiar, no matter how miserable. Okay, so the shift, the actual shift in thinking comes from changing the thinking around the belief. That's the thought or the idea that may or may not be true. That's what we have to help clients change. It's that belief, that thought, that's what actually creates the shift. So, let's just talk for a moment about this leverage point because it's really critical. And so what we're really saying is it's your current pain or your future fear, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? This is where you are and it's awful, but just how awful is it? We have to help them see. And this is the future, and of course, because it's unknown, could be fraught with a lot of things. So basically, it's the known versus the unknown. So let me give you some examples. So I had a client who was talking about the marriage and how she never lets her husband, they've been married 20-something years, and she never lets her husband make decisions. Because, he's not going to make good decisions, and he's not a good decision maker. So I just make all the choices in the house, and I take care of the kids, and I do all this. And now the husband is rebelling. And she's freaking out, right? Because now he's trying to do stuff in the house and make decisions. And she said to him, but if I let him make decisions, I really feel that everything will crumble. And I said to her, to me, it sounds like the marriage is already crumbling. So what choice do you want to make? So just think for a moment how the awareness could be changed just with that question, right? Because what she had to look at was just how bad things really were in that moment. And then, is that really how she wants to leave it? Or take a chance that, you know what, maybe if you let him make decisions, things will be great. But it's that unknown. I had a client who said recently, she said, you know, I think my problem is I really don't think I'm going to get into a relationship. And I said to her, I said, you know, there's a 50% chance that you will, and there's a 50% chance that you won't. What has you focusing on the 50% that you won't? There's no reason. But sometimes, I know it sounds so simple, but saying that to a client, it's 50-50, and you're choosing only 50%, you would be surprised that already can create awareness. I had somebody one client, and she said, if she was running a studio, and she said, if I don't come every day, the place will fall apart. And then she was exhausted, and she was complaining bitterly. She was exhausted. I can't do everything. It's too much. And then she says, but if I don't come every day, the place is going to fall apart. And I said to her, that sounds like it's a choice. You know, you're falling apart. You're complaining about being so tired and so exhausted. And perhaps if you don't come every day, what might happen? And she said, oh, you know, it still may be okay. And the studio won't, you know what, it probably won't fall apart. It probably will be. So the point I'm trying to make is if you can just show people that it's the known versus the unknown, and that the unknown really has potential to change things for the positive. And it may or may not. We're not promising anything, but at least it gets them out of what they know and where they're miserable. That part we do know. So here's an interesting statistic that I learned so many years ago. Matter of fact, when Thomas Lennon was still alive. And it has stuck with me, and it is so cool, I think. So that is 90% of people would prefer moving away from pain than they would toward pleasure. So let's just think about that for a moment. And what does that really mean, and how does that translate? So, how many times have you heard someone say, I hate my job, I just absolutely have to get out of here? They're motivated, right? I'm tired of scrimping, right? There's a lot of that negative stuff, and people want to get away from that. But the classic example I like to give, and I can do this because it's partly true for me, a really overweight person. And the really overweight person, you could say, oh, but just think, you can get new clothes, you can have more energy, the doctor's going to be so happy with you, you know, right? Is that really going to motivate somebody? You'd be surprised, not even remotely. No, that's not true for every person, but majority, 90-10. But if we say to that person, just imagine going to the theater or going to the movies and not having to worry about who's sitting next to you. Right? Getting on an airplane, getting in the theater, and not having to worry. Do you think that's going to help? Why? Why would that help somebody get more motivated?
Lessen their pain.
It's their pain. It's their pain. It's where they're really hurting. It's like, yeah, every time I sit down, I have to worry about who's next to me. Right? That is going to motivate someone before the pleasure. Well, what happens is our clients actually, I say, hand us statements on a silver platter. They give us statements, and I can't tell you. I have listened, I'm not exaggerating, I know for a fact, to several thousand coaching conversations over the years. And I know that because I record all my classes, all my mentor call, and I have over 3,000 in my files. But my point being that I have listened to a lot, and people gloss over what I call statements that should never be glossed over. So let's look at some examples. I took this from a transcript, actually. I always want to pretend like I'm not trying that hard. Yeah. That's why I'm scared that I'm not, and then you can say, you know, pretty enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, whatever. We've all heard those. I don't have a choice. How many times have you heard that, right? And, you know, we all know, you may not like the choices, but there's always a choice. Well, then I would be selfish. How many times have we heard that? If I take care of myself, I do something for me, right? Then I'll be selfish. Basically, it's what I call the if-then statement. If I leave this job, I'll never find one that's going to be great again. If I stop exercising 7 days a week, I'll get fat. You know, things that people say to us. We need to latch on to those kinds of statements because that's where we're going to begin to create awareness. So we have, besides leverage point, we have several methods. And what we're going to do now is just literally go into each one in different ways that we can create awareness besides pointing out the balance of the scale. So let's start with the cost pain point, right? And so the client says, if I share my feelings, he will leave. Now this could be, by the way, if we're going to go, you know, executive, we could say, if I speak to my direct report in that way, he will panic, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. The point is there's an if-then, right? If I share my feelings, he will leave. And the question I like to ask is, what is it costing you to hold back your feelings? Now, I will promise you, when you ask a question like that, you're going to get the laundry list, right? Well, it's costing me being authentic in the relationship. It's costing me just not sleeping right. It's certainly costing me energy. You're going to get a laundry list answer of what it's costing. Okay? And therefore, I always say, follow up with the question, what else is it costing you to hold back your feelings? And I am here to tell you that when you go to the what else, people have to really look inside. Because it's something they hadn't thought about. It's something they didn't realize just how bad things really are. But the important thing with those questions that's really critical, and that's why the underline is there, that you use the entire sentence. Because if you just say, what else, it doesn't help. It's not, there's no impact. But what else is it costing you to hold back your feelings? And I can tell you, I've had people just start, I mean, not that particular question, but people just start crying. All kinds of things can happen, bless you, by realizing that you're holding back. Now, the next part, which I think all of you are familiar with, is the benefit, right? So what do you get out of holding back? What do you suppose you get out of holding back your feelings? What's the answer they're going to give you? nothing. I don't get anything out of it. It's not I know it's not a good thing, right? That's the answer they're going to give you. But that's when I say, there has to be something, because you're still doing it. So, what do you think you get out of, let's say in this case, holding back your feelings? And the likely response is usually something like, it feels safer, or it seems easier. And those are those kinds of statements that we're going to take and say, wait a second, it seems easier to hold back your feelings and have no energy and have your feel like you're not being authentic, and you can just go right into your leverage point right there, right? Because there's no such thing. If you're doing it, there's something behind it. Okay, let's look at another one. What I call removing the perceived obstacle. So typical obstacles: time, money, I need more classes, right? I need to do more of this, or I need to do more of that. So sometimes money is real, you know, sometimes there really isn't enough money for something, but lots of times it's not exactly the truth. So the way this, for me, this works so nicely, let me give you an example. So the client said that she had just had some surgery, she was going to physical therapy, she had a lot of doctor appointments, but she started with saying, I need more balance. I'm finding, you know, I'm going to the doctor all the time, and I really need to keep building my business. I mean, it's been falling down since I had this surgery, and I need better balance. And she said, but, you know, with all these appointments and the physical therapy, and I just don't have time for my business. And basically, the question was, well, what if you didn't have all those doctor appointments? What do you think would happen? What do you think her awareness was? Anybody? What do you think it might have been? If she didn't have all those doctor appointments, she would be doing her business stuff, of course. And what she came to realize with that question, it's just an excuse. It's just, you know, she said she wanted the balance. She could have that balance. Let's face it, you don't go to the doctor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? But she was avoiding the business stuff. And that's what came out of that. Okay, another, I want to say classic, the discrepancies and the disconnect, right? So we hear these conflicts. You've got to pick up on it. So one of them, I want to say kind of classic. So early in the conversation, it was so major. And now I'm hearing that it's really not such a big deal. So what's really true? Even just pointing that out. You know how many times you've scratched your head, you've heard something, and said, wait, I thought I heard something else before. Right? Hasn't that happened to you? Where you hear that discrepancy from the client? You've got to point that out. Now, sometimes the client's really stuck. And that's when I like to use the far-fetched analogy, when somebody's really stuck in something. So I'll give you an example. So the client was out with her husband and another couple, and she came to the call and she was complaining because, or upset, because her friend had told her that she basically criticized, the client thought she felt criticized about her parenting skills. And she said, but this is such a good friend of mine, and I don't understand it. It was really hurtful. And I said, well, let's suppose she had said, I don't like your hairstyle. What would you have thought? And she said, have been ridiculous. I wouldn't care about that. I said, well, what makes that different from her comments about your parenting? So you can see sometimes this analogy can really work. Here's another one. I had a client who was a co-presenter for a corporation, and she and this colleague of hers went to present. And she said, you know, the whole time we were presenting, my colleague kept doing this thing with her hands, and I felt like she was always dismissing me. And it was so disturbing and so upsetting. And I said to her, well, let's suppose she had taken out some balls and she started juggling. So she said, oh my God, that would have been so weird and so stupid, and why would she have been doing that? And I said to her, well, what makes that any different than what she was doing with her hands? And, you know, really, if you think about it, it's because we take everything so personally, right? Like it's about us. When actually, those kinds of things are really over there with the other person. Okay. Well, we all know about challenging questions. So, when somebody's faced, let's say, with a difficult conversation, sometimes I'll say to them, if you could say anything you want, what would you say? And then they say, oh, well, I would tell him that his behavior was just unacceptable and he should never have done that in the meeting, and I was so embarrassed when that happened, and how could he have said that? I said, okay, so now let's see if we can take that and find a way to say it that he can hear you. So what happens there is, actually, I'm giving them permission to really put it out there, what they want to say. Like, really go for it. Because that will help you to understand, well, it helps the client to vent, and helps you understand what kind of point they really are trying to get across, and then help them to do it. So another way it works, I had a client who said, you know, I really want to make a contribution to the group that I'm in, but I find myself always holding back. And I don't know, I just get so nervous or whatever. And I said, well, what if the best way to make a contribution was to participate? And it kind of just stopped him in his tracks. Because, like, yeah, what if? Right? What if that was the best way? Now, the caveat here is that if you don't want to convince somebody that what they're thinking isn't right, that it doesn't work, that's challenging questions don't work that way. So, for example, I was listening to a recording of somebody, and the client said, you know, I really have this inability to handle financial investments and all those kinds of things. And the coach said, well, what makes you think that you don't have the ability? But that really wasn't the point. The point was, some people don't have an aptitude for something, and that it could be very true. So you don't want to ask a challenging question to try to convince somebody to change their mind. And then our most popular, which is direct communication. So what happens very often is in the first picture, you see, we think we're using direct communication. I can't tell you how many times people say, you know, people come to me and they say, oh, I definitely use direct communication. And then I listen and, no, not really. So, so really direct communication. And you know how, you know, newer coaches are taught never tell the client anything. But even experienced coaches, I have heard, don't always really use, because I have a lot of people coming to me for NCC, so these are not people who, don't have a lot of hours. And they think they're using direct communication, but they're not, because direct communication means that you are sharing your perception as the coach. You're the outside objective listener, and you're sharing your idea and what you think is going on. And then the important piece is that you check it out. That's the key piece. Because if you just share and then stay quiet, it's as if you're right. So if you say, I'm getting a sense that there's some real anger here. What do you think? Oh, I actually hadn't thought about it as anger. But you're right, I really am angry. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you're going to use it, you have to check it out with the client. You can share your opinion. No matter how crazy it might seem, you can share it. But then you have to check it out with a short question. What do you think? What's true about that? What comes up for you? Anything like that. Okay, so clues that the shift has taken place. So one of the, I would say, obvious clues you'll hear, and even if it's early in the conversation, doesn't matter. It's already a clue for you that something's happening. And what happens typically, I hear this all the time. So the client says, then there's some quiet, and then the client speaks, and then the coach just keeps on going with questions. It's a clue that something is already happening. So that's one. The voice change. We all, it gets louder, it gets softer, sometimes a little laugh, something changes. Silence. Client doesn't, by the way, if there's silence, your question was really good. And you should also know that I made a rule when I was first coaching because, silence is so hard for us, right? It's hard to stay quiet because sometimes it feels like, oh my God, is the client going to talk again? Or, So I made a rule, and my rule is basically I don't speak until the client has spoken after the silence. And I tell them ahead of time when we first start that if we're going to have silence, I'm going to wait for you to speak. And you know what? That rule works. And when people listen to my calls when I'm coaching, that's the one thing that always stands out so much, is how much space, how much silence. They're just shocked. And of course, the obvious that we love to hear, oh, I never thought of it that way before, right? Then we know there's been something. But the key is, when you get to those points, this is the point where you can decide, is it a transactional shift or is it transformational? So if it's transactional, the client just, is going to put up the stickies and they're going to move on, or they're just going to set up their calendar better. Those are the strategies. But if it's transformational, their thinking will be different. So keep in mind that the shift can come in waves, and it can come as a big aha, and then it sometimes can come during the conversation and sometimes after. So I do want to take a moment to talk about the silence, because I'm here to tell you, and I mean this absolutely positively, I have never, ever listened to a call where I thought there was enough silence. Ever. And I'm saying that really unequivocally because you would be surprised at what happens when you leave silence. What happens? The client is going to, you know, when you're driving in the car and it's quiet, no one's talking, everybody wants to fill the void, right? Well, I always say, let the client hang themselves on their own rope. Let them talk. I am just going to stay quiet. And the other time I don't hear it happen enough is after the client begins to answer the question. So, you ask a question, and the client says, you know, I'm not really sure. And the coach says, well, let's suppose you are sure. Let's then, you know, right away comes to something, right? And I say, Client says, I don't know. I don't say a word. Because we all know they do know, right? They know. If it's about them, of course they know. So the thing is that you really want to make sure that you leave way more silence than you can imagine. So let's go now to our practice scenarios again. We'll take the same ones. And now what I'd like you to do is think about the next thing you would say now. And then we want to hear from some people. We'll have the mic come around and hear from some people what might be different now that you might say right after one of these statements than what you would have said before. So, anybody? What would you say after any one of these statements?
We'd be silent.
Yay! Okay, so here's one.
First one, I would probably acknowledge the discrepancy in the two statements. And I would say something like, I'm hearing two different perspectives from you, which is true for you. So something acknowledging the difference.
Very nice. Yeah. Who else? What might be different from what you would say before and what you're going to say? What would you say right after one of these? Here's one over here.
I have to give you credit for this. I would probably, on the second situation, I would then say, what else would it cost you? If they're saying I'd be stuck without a replacement, I would then say, well, what else? And then probably keep trying to go down that road.
Okay, that could work. All right. What else could work there? What else could work there? And then there's one over there. You too? We have a maybe over here.
Hi, for that second one, I would say, what would it cost you to have that employee still work for you?
Excellent. Yeah, good one. What else?
Similar, what would it cost you to not say anything about the attendance?
Okay, good. What else?
What do you get from keeping her?
Excellent.
Right.
Yep.
And I would say, if you could say whatever you want to her without fear of her leaving, what would you say?
Good. Yep. Okay, we got one here and then more in the back there.
Regarding the first one, don't worry about surviving without her. With poor schoolwork, she'll be back shortly anyway.
Okay. All right. But how about the last one? How about the last one? What would you say? Okay, right here we have someone. Right in front of you. Please. Sorry.
What if it's not costing you anything at all?
I'm sorry, for which one?
For the second one.
Oh, the second one.
Yeah.
It's not costing you anything at all?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Who else? The last one. Let's do with the last one. Okay, right here we have somebody.
What do you really want?
Okay, what do you really want? We have one. Okay, we have somebody here. We have.
think on the last one, I'd go far-fetched analogy. And I would do something along the lines of, so it's such a mom thing, if your husband wanted you to shave your head, you would.
Okay, that's a good one. All right.
I would, on the last one, I'd say, who's going to be serving on the committee?
Okay, so what is that going to do? Who's going to be serving on the committee? Is that about the person or their situation?
Well, I'm trying to bring up the person that this is her life.
This is her
That's where I'm
life.
going at her more. That's my aim anyway. Maybe it's not a question, but that's my aim.
Right,
Yeah.
but just to keep in mind that when you're asking about the committee, you're asking about the story. It can only be about her.
Okay. So then it'd be, what do you want? Or,
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Whose time is it? Yeah.
Okay,
That's what I
okay.
was trying to get.
There's still something else that actually worked in that particular scenario, but go ahead.
What do you think your husband wants? I'm trying to get to the belief.
No, because the husband is irrelevant. That's the key. The husband, we have one back there who's really waiting. And we had some up here.
What is it going to cost you to serve on the committee?
Maybe, could work, okay? Oh my gosh, they're all over the place. They're here. This side of the room probably needs some attention. And over here, I'm sorry.
I would use direct communication here and make an observation, something along the lines of, it seems to me that you are trying to please everyone but yourself. Am I, what do you think about that?
Yeah, potentially.
What if your husband didn't object to your being on the committee?
You're very close, it's very close because, but then you get a story.
Oh.
Well, if he didn't object, if he didn't object, then it might not be a big deal, then I guess I really, not 100% convinced, but you're getting there. And it's not that there's one right answer, but there's something that just works like a charm.
What about this is important to you?
But okay. What is important to you? You're going to get the story. Because she's debating, I'm not sure I want to be on this committee, right? That's what she's saying. I'm not sure. But my husband wants me to do it.
If your husband didn't ask you, would you do it?
What if your husband had nothing to do with this? Thank you. What if your husband wasn't even in the picture? What would you want to do? Take him out. Remove the perceived obstacle. Take him out. He's irrelevant. What would you want? Yes, what do you want is great. But she's still in ambivalence because her husband wants her. Take the husband out. Take the other person out. Yes.
I have a question. So if we're going to concentrate on the person, would it make sense to say, why do you think your husband wants you to do it?
Definitely not, because we never ever want to
laundry.
have the client tell us what the other person
I
might
couldn't
do,
catch
might
up.
think, might
Something wrong with the window of mine or the other.
That's story.
Their window.
Story.
Their
Just-
window.
What
Yeah,
makes the
because the
question is,
laundry was
what if I
actually
ask the
clean, the
husband
neighbor's laundry was
what he
because
thinks?
the windows in their
It's just
house
what.
were dirty.
Sorry, but it's just gonna
It
lead to
looked
the
like
story.
the
So what
Yeah.
about the question, what
So-
are you
Until
sure
they
about?
cleaned their
Did you see
windows,
that?
then they saw. So
What about the question, what are you sure about?
Do
Do you feel like that's leading the story, or?
So the neighbor was not able to.
She's gonna have a hard time answering what she's sure about because she's so ambivalent, right? So she's only sure that she knows the committee has this and this going on, but on the other hand, she's done so much committee work already. So my point being here, just taking the husband out. It works perfectly. And it, by the way, in the first one, in Linda, it is a lot about, okay, I'm hearing two different things here. On one hand, there's a lot of trouble with your daughter and being in the house and it's, you know, not working for you. But on the other hand, you're saying you're not going to survive without her. What's really true?
Right. Right.
Or I think what I really said in that moment was, what else could happen? Or something like that. And that's when she realized, oh my gosh, I could start living my life. I could really start having a life, right? Okay, and in the second one, when Randy was saying about his employee has such horrible attendance, and it's been going on for 6 months. So yes, some of those questions about, you know, what has allowed you to have that behavior, good questions. But I think in the end, what really did it was, you know, when he said, if I confront her, I'm afraid she'll quit and I'll be stuck and, you know, have to look for a replacement. And what I said was balance scales. You know, it sounds like in some ways she has already left you. Right? And so, what do you want to do? And that's when he said, oh yeah, I need to talk to her. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we're pointing out, right, like the marriage crumbling, if I let him make decisions, everything will crumble. It's that balance scale. Yeah. Okay. So, and by the way, just so you know, I'm going to give you an opportunity to coach, really coach. So you'll have plenty of time in groups to coach. So I'll give you that heads up. So start thinking about something that you're willing to coach on, and we'll get into that in a moment. All right. So I just want to talk briefly about moving, because to me this is a really, really cool skill. And it helps the client, but it also helps you. So when the client has had a shift, and I don't care if it's 10 minutes in or 20 minutes in, it doesn't matter where in the conversation. When there's been a shift, there's a change in voice, there's something I haven't thought of that, I'm realizing, anything like that, then what I like to say to the client is, it sounds like something is different. When we started the conversation, you were looking for clarity. Or when we started the conversation, there was confusion. Or when we started the conversation, there was frustration. Or when we started the conversation, whatever. Where are things at this point? And what does that do? Well, it does a couple of things. So it has the client realize, oh my gosh, yeah, when we started I was here, but my God, look where I am now. And be able to spit that out and share it with you so that you also get to realize how much that client has actually taken in. Right? Because the client may not have received everything you think. But I'll tell you this, I hear this all the time on the recordings. The coach will say, so it sounds like you now have a change. You now think that this employee really has to go. You're now ready to have the conversation. You're now going to tell him what, you know, has to happen and when it's going to happen. How does that help the client? To hear the summary from you? It doesn't. So we want the client to tell us where they are in the conversation, where they are in their process. So, okay, so now, last piece before we actually start practicing everything we've learned with real live situations, and that is some of the mistakes that happen. And the biggest one, I think, is missing the shift and moving on. That's the biggest one. And I'm going to give you a literal example that I am reading with permission from a client call. the client said, I mean, from the coach and client, the client said, I hadn't thought of it that way. Now that I'm thinking about it, the idea of freedom is much more important than the other one. That makes my decision so obvious. And the coach said, what do you mean by freedom? And I really just wanted to start screaming. Why? Because what you have to realize, and this is so hard for all of us, but what we have to realize is that when clients have shifted, when they have changed their thinking, they have done a lot of work to get there. It doesn't feel like it for us because we're not invested, right? It's like, okay, yeah, you know, they moved from point A to point B. But they have done a lot of work to be there. And based on that, they're done. They're finished. And they're in a place where they don't want to go back up into their head and start answering your questions. And they will answer them, but with resentment, even though they won't tell you. Because once they're done, I don't care where you are in the conversation. Even if I had a client one time, it was literally 11 minutes into the call, and she said to me, oh my God, we have to stop. We have to stop. I'm so done, you have no idea. I thought this was going to be like a long thing and a big thing, and I can't believe we're done. Fine with me, you know. But the point I'm making is, when you hear that shift, stop. Stop the questions. And begin to, you can do the looping, and then begin to really close down. And the next one is believing the client. And this one, people have a hard time with me. They always say, but the clients are always telling the truth. And I said, yes. But you know what? The laundry really wasn't dirty, right? That laundry that was hanging was clean laundry. So if you just accept what they tell you, it's not going to work. Because you're making an assumption based on their thing, and that's not okay. Trying to provide an alternative, that's not your job. That's just not your job. You don't, you know, that we can help them see that there might be other possibilities, but it's not our job to help to try to provide that alternative. Not getting to what's underneath. You just stick at the strategy level, right, at that level, you're missing an amazing opportunity to change that client's thinking forever. Not exploring deeply enough, and I always say that people shortchange the exploration process. I don't know why, but they do. It's not about getting to a solution. It's not about finishing the conversation. And I will tell you that when I started coaching in the mid-90s, we were never allowed to go 1 minute past 30 minutes. Literally, that was the cutoff. I don't care if you were in the middle of a sentence, you could never go past 30 minutes. Well, what did that do? That helped all of us develop better skills so that we could ask those important questions, get right to the heart of the matter, and create the shift. That's really what we're going to be practicing. So, not exploring deeply enough, following the wrong goal, because remember, it may not align with their values, may not be their real thing, it might be a should. You know, if somebody wants them to do something. And then judging the limiting ideas silly, and everybody says, oh, I would never do that. But actually we do. Because when the client says something like, well, I could never do that, you know, and you're thinking, you've got to be kidding me. Of course you can do, you know, we're already judging them. So just be careful that you're not, because these are their ideas. Okay, yes?
On that, judging the limiting ideal as silly.
Yeah.
Sometimes when the client says that they can't do something.
Where's the person with the
I don't know. Sometimes when a client says that they can't do something,
is, because to me, it's not judging when you challenge them on it.
Right. Well, there's challenge and there's challenge, right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying you're not judging their idea as silly or them as silly, right? You know, I mean, sometimes, and there are times like that woman who said she's just not capable of investments and things like that. Yeah. And then let's say I was savvy, which I'm not, but let's say I was, and I might judge her as, oh, come on, everybody can do that. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. We kind of do it without even realizing sometimes. Yeah. Okay. So, yes. And we'll have time for questions after.
So the question about
Sure.
the difference between believing the client and then following the wrong goal. I'm not sure I understand believing the client.
Okay, believing the client means don't accept things at face value right off the top without questioning it. It may be true, but it just as easily may not. That laundry is clean.
Okay,
Right.
so there's limiting beliefs, you mean? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, there's
Oh,
something,
okay.
yeah, there's faulty thinking. Yeah,
Okay.
and it may be, and it may not be, it may be the truth.
And then around the, coming up with other ideas, alternatives, where is there room for brainstorming in this?
You know, I'm not big on brainstorming with the client versus asking them a question that's going to get them to come up with options. Because truth be, I never forget, I had a client and he said to me, well, what, I don't know what to do next. I don't know. And I said, well, what do you think you should do next? And lo and behold, guess what? He had an answer. So to me, it's partly trusting the client. And the brainstorming thing, very often to me, is a distraction from actually just going right where it needs to go. It's hard to explain without an example, but yes, there's a question over there.
We've had several sessions where we've
At several sessions where we, facilitators have suggested using drawing. Do you ever do that?
No. No, because, you know, I personally feel if I'm going to tell a client to draw something, it's my agenda. That's how I feel. If I'm going to tell them to do something, it's because, you know, it's something I want them to do. It may not be their thing. Okay, yes?
Can you help me understand the difference between not getting to what's underneath and not exploring deeply enough?
Yes. Not getting to what's underneath is just, it is partly not exploring enough, but the part that I wanted to distinguish is that the exploration is what's going to get to the depth. So you can get to, some people will just never get to what's underneath because they're not exploring enough. So it's kind of hand in hand. Okay, so let's actually now practice this and do it. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get into groups of 6, and the way you're going to do that probably is if you're at a table, like maybe 3 people, turn around to 3 people behind you. If you're back there, but go into groups and we'll try it out. Why is everybody leaving now? Why break up the coaching? It's also an opportunity to share something you've noticed, whether you were the client or whether you were a coach. Something you tried out that you felt was like, whoa, I can keep this one, or you know what, I'm never going to use that one again. It doesn't matter because I'm not attached to your using anything in particular that I shared other than you were open to trying something new. That's all. So with that, let's have some questions and some, hopefully some answers. We'll see. And also things that you're taking away. So we'll kind of combine processing this with takeaways, because in all the sessions I've been in, there hasn't been time for that. And I think it's always important. And, people always, on teleclasses, a lot of times people like, oh, I don't really care about hearing what, everybody got from it, who cares? But I will tell you, to me, the reason why it's so important is because it reminds you of something that you heard today that it just didn't, that wasn't the major point for you, but oh yeah, right, she said that, or that's right, I am going to take that piece away. So it is important to hear people's feedback as well as your questions. So let's be open and do that before we close down. So back there, we have two people.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I was the client in this, and the biggest thing that helped me, and it was a real situation that I'm dealing with, and to realize that the situation was the situation, but them being able to bring it back to me and really talk about what I was going through was immensely different than what I would have experienced if it had been other ways.
Yeah.
So that was huge. So I would say that's also my biggest takeaway, is how to keep it to the person. That was a huge learning.
Excellent.
And also using the what question first.
Yeah. And that will elevate your coaching instantly. Yeah. Okay, we have one more over there, and then we have one over here.
Yeah, I just wanted a point for clarification. The work that you asked to do around the mechanics of a shift,
yes,
and identifying the leverage point, is it the work that you recommend to do when we do the coaching agreement? And if it happens during the coaching conversation?
Okay, so I have a thing, and I'm here to say, and it's perfectly fine, the agreement does not have to be the first thing you do in the conversation. That's where, whoever asked that question, not exploring enough, the agreement does not have to be first. Why? Because